I never thought my accent would be something to be laughed at, especially not by someone who calls me family. But life has a funny way of showing you people's true nature when you least expect it. My name's Robert. I'm 70 years old, originally from Ireland, and I've lived in the United States for over 40 years. My accent's softened over time, sure, but it's still there, the kind of thing people find charming, or at least that's what I used to think. My son Michael was born here. He's American through and through, same spirit, same confidence, same fast way of talking. I'm proud of him. After his mom passed away, it was just the two of us for years, so when he told me he was getting married, I was thrilled. He'd met a woman named Ashley, smart, beautiful, the kind of person who lit up a room. At least, that's what it seemed like. The first time I met her, she gave me that perfect practice smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. She said, "Oh my God, I just love your accent. It's so different." I laughed it off, told her, It's the only one I've got. But there was something in her tone, not admiration, not curiosity, something mocking like I was some character out of a movie. I ignored it, because that's what you do for your kid's happiness. I wanted her to feel comfortable, wanted to believe she'd warm up. But as time went on, I realized her comments weren't innocent. Every time I spoke, she'd smile at Michael like we shared some private joke. If I mispronounced a word or used an old phrase, she'd laugh and say, "That's so cute. You sound like a leprechaun." Once, she even mimicked me in front of her friends. They all giggled and she said, "Oh, Robert, don't be offended. It's just fun." I laughed too, just to keep things light, but inside I felt something sink. I didn't tell Michael. He loved her, and I didn't want to cause any trouble. Then one weekend, they invited me to stay over. Michael had bought a new house and wanted me to see it. I brought a bottle of whiskey from back home, something special, and showed up with a smile. Ashley greeted me at the door, wearing that same perfect grin. "Robert, the legend himself. Come on in," she said, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. I could feel the coldness behind her words. Still, I stayed polite. We had dinner together, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a decent meal. Everything was fine until Ashley poured herself a second glass of wine. That's when her tongue loosened. She started telling some story about a dinner party they went to, and she looked at me mid-story and said, "Oh, you'd have loved it, Robert. They had this Irish band, people speaking your language. I barely understood a word." She laughed so loudly the whole table went quiet. Even Michael looked embarrassed. I smiled tightly and said, "Well, Ashley, maybe you'd understand if you listened more and talked less." The room froze. She forced a laugh, saying, "Oh, I'm just kidding. You know that." I said nothing else that night. Just excused myself early and went to bed, but later that night, as I was walking to the kitchen to get some water, I overheard voices from their bedroom. Ashley was talking to someone on the phone, whispering, angry. "I can't stand it when he talks," she said. "That accent makes him sound so stupid. I don't even know how Michael puts up with it." My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, she said something that froze me in place. If Michael knew what really happened, he'd kick me out in a second. My heart started pounding. What did she mean by what really happened? I stood there quietly until she hung up, then slipped back to my room. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I acted normal. I didn't want her to suspect I'd heard anything. Over breakfast, she was all smiles again, pretending nothing had happened. When I left that afternoon, I hugged Michael and said, "We should all have dinner next week." "My treat?" He smiled, said sure, and I could see how happy he was. That's when I decided I was going to find out exactly what Ashley was hiding. Over the next few days, I made some calls. A friend of mine from church worked at a law firm where Ashley's name had come up before. Turns out, she'd been fired from her previous job, not because of downsizing like she told my son, but for embezzling company funds. She'd stolen money from her own employer and made a quiet deal to avoid charges. My heart sank. My son had no idea who he'd really married. That weekend, I invited them both out to dinner at a nice restaurant. I picked a place downtown, classy but quiet. Michael showed up in a suit, Ashley in a red dress, all smiles as usual. Wow, Robert, this place is fancy. You sure you can afford it? She said with that fake laugh again. I smiled back and said, Oh, don't worry, Ashley. I've been saving for a special night like this. She chuckled, unaware of what was coming. The waiter poured our wine, we made small talk, and then I looked at Ashley and said, You know, I've been thinking about accents lately. She raised an eyebrow. Really? I nodded. Funny thing about accents, they can reveal where a person's from, but not who they really are. Sometimes the sweetest voices hide the darkest secrets. Her smile flickered. Michael looked confused. Dad, what are you talking about? He asked. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. I placed it gently on the table. You might want to read this, son. He opened it and began to read. It was a printed document, a copy of the termination report from Ashley's old company. It detailed how she'd manipulated financial accounts, stolen nearly $15,000, and quietly resigned before charges were filed. Ashley went pale. Robert, this isn't what it looks like, she blurted. Michael looked stunned. Ashley, what is this? He asked, his voice rising. It was years ago, she stammered. It was a mistake, I swear. But I wasn't finished. Michael, I said calmly, there's more. Last week I overheard her on the phone. She said if you ever found out what really happened, you'd leave her. She wasn't lying. The silence at that table was deafening. You could hear the clink of silverware from the other side of the restaurant. Ashley's eyes filled with tears. Robert, please, I didn't mean any harm. I was scared. I didn't want you to think less of me. I leaned back in my chair and said, Ashley, it's not your past that bothers me. It's your arrogance, laughing at my accent while you hide your own shame. You mocked me for where I come from, but I never lied about who I am. Michael stood up slowly, hurt in his eyes. Ashley, I think you should go, he said quietly. She started to protest, but he just shook his head. Go. She grabbed her purse and walked out, tears streaming down her face. I sat there quietly as my son stared at the table, his hands trembling. Dad, he said finally, I can't believe it. I had no idea. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. It's not your fault, son. Sometimes people hide who they are behind charm and smiles. Don't blame yourself. He nodded, and for the first time in months I saw the boy I used to know, honest, kind, open-hearted. A few weeks later, Ashley moved out. They're still finalizing the divorce, but Michael's doing better. He comes by every weekend now, and sometimes we laugh about how life teaches us in strange ways. As for me, I've learned that dignity doesn't need a perfect accent. It needs honesty. My voice might sound funny to some, but it carries every truth, every memory, every part of who I am. I'd rather have an accent that's real than a voice full of lies. And if Ashley ever remembers that dinner, I hope she remembers the moment her laughter stopped, because that was the moment truth finally spoke louder than her pride.